Good afternoon, Walter. August the 31st, 1913, would subsequently turn out in retrospect to be one of the most notable days in Irish sport, for it was on that day that Joseph Doyle was born at 12 Queen Street, Queenstown, County Cork. Queen Street is now Connolly Street and Queenstown is Cove. Joseph was a big baby, 14 pounds at birth. His father was Michael and his mother was called Anastasia, or Stacia, and he was the second in a family of 6. Michael, his father, was badly injured in an accident at work, and it was left to Stacia, the mother, to be the breadwinner of the family in their formative years. Joe would always be very fond of her. Young Joe grew up to be a powerfully strong lad. His district of Cove was called the Holy Ground, and in his early teens he was involved in plenty of scrapes. He left school at 12 or 13 and went to work in a coal depot, handling and filling 10-stone bags of coal as a manual labourer. It was heavy, back-breaking work, but it developed the young man physically, who by his middle to late teens had grown to 6 foot 5 inches and was considered very handsome. Joe also on occasions acted as a bag carrier to the passengers going to and from the large transatlantic liners that called into Cove on their journeys to and from North America. Joe was a harum-scarum type of young man who quickly got the reputation of being quite a hard man. It seems that he read a boxing manual called How to Box, written by Jack Dempsey, the famous heavyweight champion of the world, who had recently lost his title to Gene Tunney. Joe was inspired by this book, and Dempsey quickly became a hero, even to the extent that when Doyle commenced his boxing career, he started calling himself Jack, and the name stuck evermore. He also officially started using his confirmation name, Alphonsus, it is said, to give himself an air of learning, thus making up for his basic lack of education. Joe tried to develop his punching ability in his ambition to be a champion boxer by punching systematically the walls and door frames of his parents' home. One day he realized the full potential of his famous right hand by knocking down a donkey with it. The poor animal was stunned, Joe having to haul it back onto its feet. When Joe was 17 years of age, he tried to enlist as a soldier in the Irish Free State Army, but was too young. People told him he would look well in uniform. Also, there might be opportunities there for him to develop a boxing career. Undeterred, he joined the British Army as an Irish Guardsman late in 1930, and thus began a brief soldiering life, but more importantly, his boxing career. Now calling himself Jack, he was based among other places in Windsor, near enough to London. He quickly became involved in the Guards' boxing activities and gained a reputation as a great amateur boxing prospect, winning fights in interregimental tournaments. At this time, too, his pleasing light tenor voice came to the notice of many of his friends and associates. Len Harvey, the famous professional boxer who had won the British title at different weights, ranging from middleweight to heavyweight, was training in Windsor at this time, and Doyle audaciously requested a sparring session with him. Harvey realised Doyle was very raw, but that he had a devastating right-hand punch, so he contacted his manager, Dan Sullivan. Sullivan watched Doyle in army bouts and quickly realised his potential. he told Doyle he would like to recruit him to professional boxing. Doyle by this time had become restive as a soldier. He had only been in the Guards less than a year, and so this offer seemed a way of furthering his real ambition. After being initially refused permission to leave, the Guards were not keen to lose a man who was bringing in so much sporting prestige. They relented, and Sullivan put up the money for Jack to buy himself out. So in February 1932, he was officially discharged after having 28 fights and 28 wins, 27 of them by knockouts. Lord Gough, the officer commanding, in his testimonial, called Jack a smart, clean, sober, hard-working and promising young NCO. Walter, some of these words would sadly not apply to Jack in the years that lay ahead. Sullivan realised that in Jack he had quite a prospect, and his publicity campaign to promote his young fighter started in earnest. He involved the newspapers, and soon many people were believing that Jack was a real contender for major boxing honours. In addition, as I've said, he was very handsome, and this added to the glamour which began to be built up around him, and he only 18 years of age. Soon he had 5 professional wins. Thousands wanted to watch him wherever he fought. All his opponents succumbed early in his bouts. By the end of 1932, he had 8 straight wins, not one fight lasting longer than 2 rounds, his opposition crumbling in the face of Jack's very powerful right hand. Sullivan started to show Jack off around the fashionable parts of London. Jack enjoyed the bright lights and all the razzmatazz and celebrity that went with it. The autograph hunters, especially the pretty girls and women who flocked to his contests, they found him, it is said, irresistible. He started to move in high society. The famous took to him, and he became a personal friend of a lady called Thelma Furness, who was a close associate of Edward, the Prince of Wales. Indeed, he was known to the Prince of Wales. The two met socially on occasions and enjoyed each other's company. It is said the Prince was very fond of him. Jack had great presence. Whenever he entered a room, all eyes would turn and admire his magnificent physique. During his first year as a professional boxer, Jack had earned quite a bit of money. Indeed, for his fight with Jack Pettifer, he received a purse of £750, which was a large amount of money for those days. The story is told that on one evening late in 1932, 3 of his former army pals were walking through London's Hyde Park. They stopped to admire the handsome young toff in top hat and tails, with a white scarf around his neck, escorted by a glamorous woman, come out of the Park Lane Hotel and get into a chauffeur-driven car. He didn't recognise them, but they were flabbergasted. It was Jack, just a year after he had left the army. So he certainly knew how to spend his money, though certain women showered him with favours, and in fact he was something of a gigolo. Another lady friend of his at this time was a certain Phyllis Kempton, who was very wealthy and was a Jean Shrimpton of her day. Dan Sullivan realised he had gone too far in promoting Jack as a celebrity, for Jack had got a definite taste for high living. Dan cashed in soon after and received £5,000. Such was Jack's potential as a crowd pleaser by allowing a certain General Critchley, who ran the White City Stadium in London, to have a major say in his management and in promoting his fights. Jack was rather sore about this. In fact, it was the first sour note of his boxing career. He and Critchley never really got along well afterwards. Critchley soon after sent Jack to a quiet training camp in France for some months to take his mind off the bright lights and to have him learn more boxing technique and not just rely on a big punch in order to prepare him for a shot at the British heavyweight crown. When Jack returned to London, his management thought of promoting him as a singer to help the build-up for the big fight with the champion Jack Peterson. They were aided by Jack getting a surprise engagement at the London Palladium to appear in sketches and to sing with Bud Flanagan and Teddy Knox of the Crazy Gang. His good singing voice was known in society circles. Jack sang Mother Machree and other Irish songs, many made famous by Count John McCormack, and was a sensation. Shortly afterwards, Decca signed Jack as a recording artist. The whole idea, from his management's point of view, was a huge success. Jack's voice would be heard on the radio in the days just before his fight with the champion Peterson. The publicity value was enormous. Jack Doyle fought Jack Peterson for the British heavyweight title at the White City Stadium just a few weeks short of Doyle's 20th birthday on the 12th of July 1933. Jack was to receive £3,000 for the fight. Some 90,000 spectators, Walter, it is estimated, crammed the stadium, though the official figure was 25,000, whilst 250,000 blocked off the streets and roads near the venue. London's traffic, it is said, came to a standstill on the night, but the fight itself was a disaster for Doyle. With all of London's society present, he was disqualified in the second round of the contest. All his fans in Ireland were devastated, especially the thousands who gathered outside the offices of the Cork Examiner that evening. They were stunned. Jack was to be stunned himself shortly after the fight by being informed that his purse of £3,000 was being withheld due to his disqualification for a low punch and suspended from boxing for 6 months. He fought this through the courts, winning his case initially, but the British Boxing Board of Control appealed and were successful in withholding all but £500 of Jack's purse money. Meanwhile, Doyle became very disheartened and disenchanted with boxing because of this, and his thoughts turned to his other talent, singing. A tour was arranged to take him all over the British Isles, starting at the Theatre Royal in Dublin, then the largest venue for concerts in the British Isles. It was an enormous success. Jack's act packed out the 3,600-seater theatre, and he was earning £600 a week. His Irish fans and the Irish public generally had much sympathy for him. They saw him as receiving rough justice. Anyhow, he went back home to his native county Cork, to the Opera House, and was rapturously received, being escorted by bands, everyone wanting to meet him, shake hands, get his autograph. His act generally consisted of him beginning by singing some songs. Then a boxing ring would be erected, and he would go through training routines and shadow box. He was promoted as the man who sang like McCormack and fought like Dempsey, and the audience loved it. Due to his troubles with the British Boxing Board of Control, Jack had only one fight in 1934, but as well as his singing tour, he was signed by British International Pictures to act in a film called McGlusky the Sea Rover, in which he starred opposite an actress called Tamara Desney. It was a 58-minute low-budget film based on the novel by A.G. Hales. Jack played the part of a roguish buccaneer, but wasn't a great actor, and the film was no great success. One critic saying, though, that Jack had a certain animal magnetism on screen. Later in 1935, it was released in the United States as Hell's Cargo, but didn't do any better there either. Earlier in 1935, Jack, by this time under the care of a new manager, Walter Friedman, known also as Good Time Charlie, took himself off to the United States. He was not to fight again in Britain until 1938. At this time, as I've said, Jack had ideas of becoming the Dempsey of boxing, the McCormick of singing, and the Douglas Fairbanks of the silver screen. He met Dempsey, his idol, who encouraged him but joked, "Wouldn't it be awful if you ended up only singing like me and fighting like McCormack?" He had 4 contests in the United States, winning 3 of them, but losing to Buddy Bear, the younger brother of Max Bear, the former heavyweight champion of the world. Friedman was of little use to Jack as a manager, and indeed milked him of a lot of money and considered him a meal ticket. In the US, Jack met the lady who was to be his first wife, the well-known actress Judith Allen. Indeed, he met her at a party given by Kay Francis, the megastar, who introduced him there to many film stars of the period, including James Cagney and Pat O'Brien. Jack was lionized wherever he went in the States in this period, spending his own money freely in the process. Jack pursued Judith with the passion of the strong, and in return she fell heavily in love with him. After a whirlwind romance, they were married in a registry office in April 1935. She had been previously married and divorced from Gus Sonnenberg, the world professional heavyweight wrestler who had introduced the flying tackle and the headbutt to that sport. In the beginning, Jack and Judith's married life was idyllic. She came to watch several of his fights, but then Jack resumed his old womanizing ways. It is true that she sacrificed much of her film career at this time for him. In all, she was to appear in some 29 films, starring in many of them. She partnered Jack in a song and dance variety show, and they left the United States in 1936 and returned to England. They toured with the act in England. Judith found that Jack was still hugely popular, and their act, now called Punch and Judy, had a marathon tour to packed houses wherever they went. They visited Ireland, and the contrast with their popularity in Great Britain, and indeed Jack's last appearance in his native country, especially with his send-off from Cove, was especially marked. People reacted coldly towards them, it is said, because Judith was a divorced woman. It is hard to keep remembering that at this time, in the mid to late 30s, Jack was still in his mid-20s. Such was the success he had enjoyed, both in boxing and singing. But the old yen he had for boxing, despite earning huge sums as a variety artist, returned. However, the British Boxing Board of Control would not let him resume his career, as he still owed legal fees resulting from his court action over the Peterson fight. Disillusioned, Jack and Judith quietly returned to the United States, to California, where she resumed her movie career. She landed Jack a part in a thriller film called Navy Spy in 1936. But most people who saw it said it was dull. The realization that he wasn't much good as an actor at last sank in with him. But in California he had little to do except join the fast-set life of film stars like Clark Gable and Errol Flynn. He became very close friends with this duo and others like Johnny Westmuller, Frederick March and Bing Crosby. His friendship with Gable did not prevent the pair having a fist fight over a lady called Carol Lombard. Gable was sent sprawling from a right-hand punch from Jack, but they made it up apparently afterwards. Jack became bored with life in California, and his old love for boxing and being a prize fighter returned yet again. I really do think that boxing was his greatest love. However, whether he had the dedication to spend long hours in the gym and the physical training regime which that would entail over a long and sustained period, I very much doubt. He cabled Dan Sullivan in England that he wished to return to resume his boxing career. Judith was furious with him. She no doubt was certain that once back in London he would continue his philandering ways. They had a furious row and he returned alone.
And Jim O'Hagan will be back next Sunday to continue the story of Jack Doyle, including his time with the colourful lady who appeared with him on some of his recordings, Movita.
Speak to me of love and say what I'm longing to hear. Tender words of love, repeat them again, I implore you. Speak to me of love and whisper these words to me, dear. I adore you. Sometimes I'm glad, at times I'm sad, and now I'm in love. At times I'm mad, that's when I miss you. And all the time I want to kiss you. My wounded heart you always heal with sympathy and sweet appeal. You're like a dreamy lover to me. I often wonder if you're real.
In next Sunday's programme.